Well, good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to day 7 and session number 15 of the AMBA and BGA Business School Leaders Forum, brought to you by GoToWebinar by LogMeIn. For those of you that don't know me, I'm David Woods-Hale, Director of Marketing and Communications at AMBA and BGA, joining you from London today. And for this session, I'm delighted to be joined by Glen Murphy, MBA Director of QUT Business School in Australia, Heather Connolly, Director of Professional Programs at Waikato Management School, University of Waikato in New Zealand, and Chris Vass, MBA Director and Associate Professor at the College of Business and Law at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. They're shortly going to talk us through the complex and interesting challenge of the design and digital delivery of MBA programs and the impact and legacy of COVID-19. And I'll let the panel introduce themselves in a second. This webinar will work a little bit differently from the other sessions and will be a panel discussion and Q&A. So if you've got any questions or thoughts for our panelists, just pop them in the little box in your control panel and we'll hope to answer as many as we can towards the end of the session. If we do run out of time, don't worry, because these will be passed on to the speakers and they'll get in touch with you directly. Please also feel free to share your thoughts and musings on the social channel of your choice using the hashtag BSLF. So, just to start the conversation, if I come to you first, Heather, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role?
Yep, no, thank you so much for that. So yes, so I've been in a number of roles at the University of Waikato, but most recently in the role of Director of Professional Programs. So that actually encompasses 2 programs. We have our MBA program, which we've been running now for 26 years in 2 campuses. And we also have what we consider to be our MBM program, which has predominantly been international, and we have about 3 cohorts of them come in a year. So it's been really interesting for us in our particular programs that we've got in terms of the impact that COVID's had and how we've actually pivoted and how we've gone digital depending on the client that we're actually servicing.
Lovely, thank you very much. And if we come to you next, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself and tell our delegates a little bit about what you do?
Sure, thanks for that, David, and thanks to AMBA for organizing this forum, very timely. So I'm Chris Vass, I'm based in Christchurch, New Zealand, the South Island. My role at the university is largely to head up the MBA program and also in my spare time look after industry and executive programs. So over the past year and a bit, what we've been doing here at Canterbury is refreshing the MBA program in consultation with industry, and we've successfully launched a new program this year, some of which we'll talk about in the discussion.
Thanks, Chris. And last but not least, if we come to you, Glen, if you could just share a little bit about your role.
Hi everyone, how are you going? I'm the MBA Director at QUT here in Brisbane. So we have 3 main programs. So we have the MBA, which is our oldest. We have the Executive MBA, which is delivered intensive face-to-face mode or in blended delivery. And a bit like Chris, we've newly set up in the last 18 months an online MBA, which caters, of course, nationally, and probably next year will go internationally, depending how things travel. So yeah, an ever-growing program. And as these guys will tell you, it's a pretty tough market down here. We don't have as many people as in Europe or the US, or in the Asian region, but we try to stay alive and do what we do best.
Lovely, thank you very much, everybody. So Heather, if I come to you first, it's probably not news to anyone listening that COVID-19 has forced many MBA programs to move to online delivery. However, staffing challenges are sometimes more challenging than for those of participants and students, and even the technology that you have to use to put these programs in place. I'd be interested to find out from you what strategies you use to engage staff who have only delivered in a traditional or face-to-face environment.
That's actually a really great question, and I'm sure that many of our delegates today could actually really resonate with this one, and I'd really like to hear back their feedback as well. It was interesting because I think at a university level, the university had strategies in place, but some of those strategies were so broad that in many senses we had to take them on board and say, what can we do for our staff in terms of the way that they teach, because they don't teach like undergraduate courses where you've got traditional lectures and tutorials. Our staff were teaching outside of hours. So from a university perspective, they put together pretty quickly a group of online resources they were very, very comprehensive. And the real thing that we found that staff teaching on the MBA program struggled with was what was important for me right now with my time poor nature that I've got. So what we did very, very quickly is every day we ran a session for about an hour, and in we use Zoom as our platform, but in these sessions we basically said, here's what you need to learn today, here's what you actually need to do today, here's how you do this. And we actually set up little short, sharp snippets where people would say, like, today's lesson might have been how to set up the learning platform in an environment which is actually going to help the students step through what they're expected to do before they turn up to that first session, how to log into the Zoom session, many staff didn't even know how to create breakout rooms. So rather than expecting them to go and try and find this themselves, we set up these daily sessions where it was like, come with the problem, we'll actually help you with a solution. And those sessions grew pretty quickly. We started with what we considered to be our staff that were relatively happy and confident picking up those sessions and sort of leading them. And then it became very much academic and faculty led, where people were logging and going, oh, well, I'd like to be able to do this with my assessment, but I don't know how to do it. Or I've had Wi-Fi issues, how have you got around them? So it really became faculty led, and I think that's where we were so successful in being able to deliver to the students. But it wasn't without teething problems. Another strategy that we used, which I found very successful, was we got staff to recognise that if we could, I mean, we're a small university compared to many of you listening today. We have probably got faculty in the management school of about 100, and in terms of teaching on the MBA and teaching on the MBM program, we've probably got faculty of about 20 to 25 that teach on those programs. But another thing which was really, really quite successful is we had a number of faculty that were quite concerned about how they were going to deliver. So we threw out the challenge to them that maybe this gave us an opportunity to actually team teach. So you weren't necessarily having to convene a whole course, you weren't necessarily having to put everything together yourself. And then all of a sudden we could actually look at how we could team teach to get through some of the challenges. When literally in New Zealand, we shut down for a week and then we will all go again. So team teaching came out of it as a strategy, and that's actually been one of the pivots we've had moving forward, is actually a lot more team teaching. We've got economics people teaching together with supply chain people that are also teaching with digital people. And that's all to actually solve the problem for our particular class. The final strategy I'll probably put before I pass on is getting past that traditional weekend MBA class of 8 hours. We deliver our particular course with the option of doing weeknights, which are 3 hours, a lot more easier to deliver in an online environment, but the 8 hours became a real challenge. So we did quite a bit of brainstorming with staff who were quite concerned about how they were going to actually deliver and keep people engaged for 8 hours. And that again came down to creative ways of doing it, creative ways of actually engaging the students during that particular period of time, the sorts of materials that they created beforehand. So that was another strategy. But the biggest learning was show people, don't expect people to go and read and try and find how to do it themselves. So we invested a lot of time in our team to showing people how to do those things using technology, using a Zoom platform, versus expecting them to go and find out how to do it themselves. That was our biggest strategy for success.
Thanks, Heather. I think that you've really hit the nail on the head of what a lot of other deans and MBA directors would be saying at the moment as well, that there was a sort of very short period of crisis that moved to strategy. And I think that you quite rightly point out a lot of learnings you've been able to take forward to build a strategy to go forward. Is that something that yourselves, Chris and Glen, have shared in your experience of having to take programs online very quickly to sort of deal with the COVID crisis and move forward into a more strategic mindset?
Do you want to go first, Glen?
So just to clarify, David, you're saying, like, what have we learned out of this that we'll keep doing moving forward? Is that the...
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, it's interesting. We, a bit like Heather. Well, Heather was probably more courageous than we were in that we were mid delivery when we had to pivot to online. So the mantra became very quickly do the simple things really, really well. And we were lucky actually that some of the more, I guess, kind of digitally aware facilitators were our conventional face-to-face MBA program already teaching. So they pivoted really quickly. And to Heather's point, they were able to give us some, I guess, data and examples of what worked for them during their pivot that we could pass on to the next set of facilitators who, because we operate the 6-week blocks. So I think that definitely giving people a model to work to was really, really handy. We're now facing a situation, interestingly, talking about moving forward, and that we realize now that our MBA program has always been traditional. It's our oldest program. It's 30 years old. It's always been a face-to-face, 6 to 9 at night type scenario. You come into class, etc. We definitely feel that although the face-to-face component will remain, we now know that we're pretty confident that our MBAs will now say to us, I still want to come in for 4 of the 6 kind of like weeknights that I'm expected to be there, or whatever, 7 nights. But for 2 of them, I want to come and just do it via Zoom. And because we've done it and we can do it, and we know, they're going to go, there's no excuse not to, right? So we think that potentially we'll be finessing that model moving forward as a good example of, well, if it can be done, it's clearly an option for people. So yeah, Chris.
Yeah, no, I think like Glen, we were right in the middle of the term as well. So with the new MBA that we launched this year, part of the model was a blended delivery model. So what we said right from the outset was, given our cohort is quite a mature age cohort, the likelihood of them being in class for the weekly sessions is going to be quite remote, and with families and life, they want that flexibility of attending the session, but not necessarily having to be there in person. So with our model, what we've done is we've said, yep, we will have the sessions running on campus during the week, but we would live stream them again using Zoom. So we were right in the middle of delivery of that first term, and it was largely also a very new experience for our faculty, because it was a very new model. The MBA program at Canterbury had been going for a very long time and very traditional in how it was delivered. So I guess the faculty in that term were adapted well. The one challenge we did have with the new model that we've introduced is to take into account that we want our MBA participants to put some of that learning into practice. We've said, okay, the weekly sessions you can attend via Zoom or you can come on a campus, but as part of each core course, there is a compulsory weekend intensive. And then that's not a Zoom session. So that has to be hands-on, activity-based. So you come into class and you work on real-life challenges. Now that was one of the problems for us in terms of how we pivoted those weekend intensives, because no one's going to sit on Zoom for bloody 6 to 8 hours. So that was probably the biggest challenge we faced. But again, in consultation with the students, and the students were starting to warm up to online delivery and Zoom. We had to pivot in terms of the number of hours and how we actually delivered those weekend sessions. But just like Glen, I think the students responded well in that they were getting more comfortable with Zoom. And I think the last few months, everyone's been Zooming in, out, and doing everything via Zoom. I mean, for 3.5 months, I was away from the country, and I had to Zoom practically for every meeting. And the first face-to-face meeting I had on campus, I felt quite weird after all those Zoom sessions, because it was just, after 3.5 months, coming and sitting next to a person and having the conversation was quite different. But I think in terms of the Canterbury model, the blended delivery, the pivot for those weekend sessions to Zoom, I think has been received well, not without its challenges. But at the same time, you need to make sure that your faculty are game to trial some of that, and are willing to say that they don't know the answer to some of those problems. One of the other innovations we've taken into the program was a tag team teaching model. So every course now in the Canterbury MBA has to have a faculty and an industry adjunct teaching combined. So that was a little bit of a challenge as well. But again, once you have the industry people in those conversations, it becomes much more easier for faculty who are not necessarily trained up from the get-go to start having those conversations via the different platforms. So yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Just coming back to you, Heather, if you had to sum up, I suppose, what the biggest challenge, or what the most challenging aspect of working with staff to really deliver online would be, what would you say that would be, and how have you sort of worked with them to overcome that?
I think fear. I actually think the biggest challenge was taking staff and actually letting them know that it was okay to fear the change, but also to overcome the change, if you understand where I'm going with it. I had one staff member who was stuck in Australia teaching on, not on our MBA, but on our MBM, and recognising our MBM class are 99%, 95% probably international. We've got a group of international students here in New Zealand who have gone into lockdown in their varying homes. They're in their mid-20s. They're away from home. And your only convener for this particular paper is stuck in Australia. And he said, I'm fearful of how I do this. And he was a relatively young convener of the paper. He was probably in his early 30s. And I said to him, I said, you'll be okay. You just got to bring the students along with you, and you've got to be honest with them. So the biggest challenge was actually allowing staff to recognise it was okay to go into that new class. So when we've probably gone through, setting the scene, we've gone through probably 4 different MBA classes, depending on where students are in their MBAs. And with our MBM, it's very intensive. It goes for a month. So we probably went through about 6 different classes during that time, depending on which cohort students were in. So actually telling staff it's okay to fear change, but embrace the change. But more than that, that they can also explain that to students, that actually the participants we've got in our papers, just like Chris said before, they're human beings. And one of our conveners went in and he actually said to the class, I've set this assessment, this is how I've set the structure of the class. It might work, it might not work, let's co-create it together. And he actually found that at the end of every single session, he was reflecting, changing, adapting, telling the class what was going on. And he said his biggest thing at the end was, I've learned more in this last 4 weeks than I've ever learned teaching, because I've actually had to step into that arena of where my fear is, and that fear is of doing something that I've never done before. So to me, the biggest challenge is getting staff to recognise that's okay, and that actually we're there to support them, and actually allowing them that through stepping out there, they can be more creative. They can change the way they're doing things. The university decided, of course, with all the undergraduate courses, we were about to go into exams. We've never had exams in the MBA, but actually said no exams across the whole university. Well, once you've got faculty that teach on the MBA, MBM, talking to faculty who are not, creativity comes out in the way that we can actually look at assessing students, getting students to assess each other. So to me, the biggest challenge, allowing people to embrace their fear and helping them in the process.
Thanks very much, Heather. Okay, Chris, if you don't mind if we come to you next. You've recently significantly reimagined your MBA program with involvement from industry, collaborating in the delivery of your online program. I'd just like to find out from you what you think industry seeks to achieve through collaboration with MBA programs.
Sure. So let me just paint the context for Christchurch and the Canterbury MBA first. So when I came into the role, one of the first conversations I had was with our industry board. And some of the members on the board were quite open, and they had said to me and my superiors previously that they would never hire an MBA for the sole reason they're either too aggressive, or they just, they don't want to work with teams, and so on and so forth. So for me, the problem was not just refreshing and revamping the MBA, but to make sure that I could get industry on site. So with our program, again, 85% of my cohort are all domestic students, domestic as in domestic to the city. So for me to continue having a program that thrives and sustains, I need to bring industry on site. So part of that equation was, convincing industry that the MBA program was not just a university program, it was a program that was going to be put in place that services the needs of industry. So from the outset, we had to start having those conversations to make sure we were doing and we were preparing not our graduates or MBA students for what happens after they graduate, but for them to be able to deliver on our promise while they're in the program. So let me give you a bit more on that. So as far as industry buy-in into the program, we said, okay, what do we need to do to be able to make you more comfortable that the graduates that we produce from the MBA would meet your requirements? So the things were, it was never about the technical skills or the knowledge and the competency. It was mostly about the other soft skills. But at the same time, it was also about, how do we get our students while they're in the program to think about taking on some of these real life challenges, as opposed to just doing what the academics traditionally would say, write your essay and your reports and do all of that, with many a time little connection to the real world. So one of the innovations we've taken into the program, as I said earlier, was this tag team approach. So every core course now in the Canterbury MBA has to be led by an academic and an industry practitioner. It goes back to Heather's point around fear. We as academics, I think we still like to think of us as being the sage on stage, and we seldom want to ever share that stage with anyone else, especially someone who's probably coming in from the real world who's going to question what we teach in class, its relevance to what's happening in the real world. So one of the things we also said from the outset, whatever MBA we design today is going to only have a lifespan of about 5 to 7 years. So we had to have those open conversations with industry. And so in having those conversations, what we identified were some of the key things. So one is industry generally wants to collaborate with the business school and with the MBA programs. The problem sometimes is they don't know where the front door is. Now, although we might sit in university and think, we're here, industry can come and talk to us. They have no clue of where to go and who to speak with. So the genuine collaboration is the appetite is definitely there. It's about facilitating those conversations and building those relationships. The second was problem solving. As you would expect in a COVID era or even pre-COVID, the appetite and the momentum from industry, given the real world, well, I keep saying real world, that they operate in, when things happen quite rapidly, they're not waiting for students to finish their MBA and then come and work on a project that will solve a particular problem. They want, real-time solutions to problems. At the same time, they're also looking for engagement with faculty who work on research problems, who have got the capability to deliver the thought leadership. So that was another area. So they're willing to have the conversation. They want to know how to start having those conversations, and they want to know that from the business school as well, that there is genuine appetite to collaborate. It's not that we just go out to industry and say, okay, we've got an internship, have we got a project for you, or we want money for research, or come and just guest speak on our program. So that was having those open conversations, and then ultimately it's also about talent identification. In Christchurch, the market is very small. Everyone knows pretty much everyone else. So it's about building those networks, and industry coming into the program right at the outset want to be able to identify where the talent is. Sometimes it's sitting in a different industry, but people are looking to pivot industries as well. So how do you identify the talent through the process? So it's about the collaboration, it's about the problem solving, it's about the thought leadership and talent identification as well. So it was those conversations that we had with industry that helped us rejuvenate and refresh the program.
I just want to pick up on some of the points you made there, because I think that for a lot of business schools who have industry relations, they can fall into the trap of it being quite transactional. So thinking about it in terms of, visiting professors, recruitment, funding, and so on and so forth. What would your advice to those people be to move away from the transactional relationship and have a genuine collaboration with industry? Yep.
So I think when industry looks at business schools and looks at MBA programs, the one thing they want to see is results. They want to see, take up. They want to see the ability of the candidates and the participants to be solving real problems. So, for instance, now, given we're going through the COVID issue and the pandemic, that's obviously affecting globally, but it's also affecting, local regions, local industry. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're working with our local economic agency over here, and we're bringing, industry partners from up north, from Auckland, from multinationals, to tackle some of the problems over here. So just in fact, about an hour and a half ago, I was speaking to the entire team of our industry adjuncts and the industry partner. The point being over there is, in a short period of time when the course is being delivered, how do we tackle some of these problems? So over the next 6 to 8 weeks, what we're doing is, through the course, we're getting our participants to look at real manufacturing challenges in Christchurch, real challenges around ag business, and real challenge around how do we revive businesses in the city. So it's one thing about us as academics, imparting the knowledge and facilitating those learnings, but it's also for the students to be able to show in real time that they can deliver on some of these solutions. So the finale for the course that we're delivering in July, August is we're going to have a panel of C-suite judges coming in and looking at those presentations that the students deliver. And we'll put some cash up, and we're going to get the students the good presentations and the good ideas to go further and solve some of those problems. So in doing so, we're building a relationship and collaborations with the industry, but it's also for industry to recognize that the students, the MBA programs, can deliver on their promise, not just in graduating good quality grads, but even through the program, they can deliver on some of those real problems.
Thanks, Chris. We've already had some questions coming through in this, and I'll come back to that in a second. But I think just before we move on to Q&A, if I come to you next, Glen, I think when we talk about online programs, especially in the context of COVID-19, a lot of the conversation has been around the technology employed to take courses online, and that's something we've talked about a lot over the past week during this conference. But you've gone on record for emphasizing the important nature of online appropriate pedagogy and teaching approaches, and that's something I'd like to pick up with you. In terms of designing your own online MBA, how did you sort of interpret this approach and take it forward?
Yeah, it's thanks, David. Yeah, a bit like Chris. We were looking at a design to move forward that really reinvented the MBA. That was, future-proofed the MBA somewhat. And you guys have figured out now. I hang out with these two legends, and they run some pretty good programs and have awesome ideas. So I'm kind of under pressure to keep doing better myself. So these guys, we catch up, obviously, sometimes during the annual forum, which is a pity we can't do this year, but I still got a chance to hang out with these guys. So I kind of knew what they were doing. I kind of knew that, because we all, being in the Australasian region, we all had similar challenges. They did need to be future focused. And as you say, we really wanted to make it like an online pedagogy. It's been a constant frustration for me over the last, well, I'll be showing my age and say 20 years, talking about this sort of stuff, and it always reverts back to technology. And it's even happened now, like people losing their mind over, oh, it's the new age of online. Yeah, maybe. I think everyone should, huge round of applause to Zoom. Apologies for the webcast we're showing now, but people can, I think, honestly say that for most of us who teach management, strategy, execution, operations, that organization has done exceptionally well delivering over this period. But that's not the be-all and end-all. One thing that really this has shown is that the reality is that learning is not lecturing. And people like me, Chris, Heather, all the other people out there, you are, we can try our best to make, I guess, complex things simple, and we can help explain things. But ultimately, learning is about, a really nicely well-designed assessment piece. It's about getting, as Heather says, students together to collaborate and share ideas, and all things going well, really have a passionate, committed argument about the pros and cons. That's learning. So the idea that we somehow, I think someone at UTS, University of Technology Sydney, made a nice comment that this is kind of emergency response learning. I think a lot of us have done that. I'm not going to say that we did a magic, we did a great job in pivoting what we could in our MBA program. Those guys did an amazing job, but they didn't really pivot too much in terms of their pedagogy. They didn't have a chance. Pedagogy is hard. You've got to think about it, right? So, but when we did the online MBA, we were like, what works best online? Ironically, active stuff, challenging stuff. So we were heavily inspired by the Maastricht model, where the whole university, if you like, is based around problem-based learning. There is a stack of evidence around problem-based learning, and guess what? It is interesting, it is relevant, it is engaging, and it promotes learning. So we were like, we can actually, and then at the same time, we were reading about the phenomenological approach coming out of Finland, which is this kind of transdisciplinary kind of approach to learning. And it all seemed to fit. So we knew at the heart of it all, by having a phenomenological based learning model, you can make that phenomenon constantly relevant along the way. But we knew that wasn't enough. We didn't have to have an infrastructure behind it. So not bagging out technology as per se for an online model, but people go wild for like the Harvard wall. And I'm like, you know what? Essentially, it's just a big Zoom screen and you've got a presenter in front teaching a case. Like, I don't want to be controversial, but that's essentially what it is, right? So we have the chronological model. We have the coacher process, which is a week by week structured learning process. If you wish to follow, you can. And it really is about directing students to think and discuss in what we call action learning groups. But that's a model that is pretty structured at the start of the degree and is very laissez-faire and loose at the end. It's deliberately designed from that, conveyance information to convergence information across the length of the degree. And then we do use our teams as our main collaboration platform, and they form our big three chunks of the design of the pedagogy. So in essence, no single point of failure. If any one of us is a bad night or whatever reason, or we're not super au fait with delivering via webcam, doesn't matter. You've got the assessment piece that's well designed and aligned to a real world existing scenario. Like right now, what have we got? We got class I'm teaching. We're looking at how Apple TV Plus is planning, or can they compete against Netflix and Disney Plus? It's happening right now. They're literally news stories like adding and creating some pain in their assessment. They think they've got assessment sorted out, and then a news article comes out, got to pivot again. So all this stuff's happening in real time, but it is supported by this infrastructure that encourages them, requires them, and helps them collaborate, argue, discuss, debate, produce an outcome. So I think, as I say, ironically, the further you move away from standard deliver, the better it becomes for online learning, basically. Now, we all know that actually it's good for all learning, right? But if you're going to do one type of learning online, we figured very early on that it was basically actually this kind of problem-based, phenomenological-based learning style that works best online, because that's where you have your breakout rooms, you have your discussions, you get the nuance, etc., etc. So that was our approach, yeah, so far so good. Yeah, working pretty well.
Thanks, Glenn. I think it's fair to say that you're no stranger to online MBAs. You've been working in this for years. You and I have had a lot of conversations about this over the years. But I think a lot of people over the last maybe 3-4 months have become very new to online learning very suddenly. And I was just wondering, given all your expertise and experience in online delivery, is there still anything new you learned during the COVID-19 pandemic? You talked a little bit about pivoting. What was your key takeaway from this sort of period?
So all of you in the room who've got a PhD will know what I'm about to say. You start off PhD thinking, I know nothing. Halfway through the PhD, you think, such a legend, I've got this all under control. If you've done it well, at the end of your PhD, you think, oh, I don't really know anything. That's exactly where we're at. Like we 12 months ago, we thought, oh, we're winning. We've learned a stack load over the last. You never stop learning. Like it's actually been great. The first thing I will say, and same as Chris and Heather said, our well, we call them associates, but our students have just been outstanding. Like their positive attitude to this, they go, yeah, this is not optimal, but let's have a crack and let's go with it. And they've just been outstanding. And we were very open up front from the very beginning. We said, look, especially like the classes that are normally face-to-face, we're pivoting people. Like bear with us. We'll get the basics done well. But in every phase, every iteration, we asked for feedback. And one thing I loved was that it was really, so back to what Chris was saying about, there's a perception of MBAs and then there's reality. And I tell you, our lot were amazing, very constructive, very supportive, very pointed and very clear on their instruction around, you're doing this well, you need to square away that. Outstanding. Like we got so much information around, dumb little things around lighting. You see in this room, like the lighting is not right. The lighting should come up. You can see that there, better light. Dumb little things like lighting, where the camera's positioned. One thing we have noticed is interesting. We're going to change our dates. We normally run our online MBA from 6 to 8 in the evening. We've noticed that actually the family doesn't really distinguish whether somebody's studying or not at 6 p.m. So what we've noticed is particularly our parents, when they're in here in the centre at 6 p.m, they can forget about family. Family just gets on what they do because they're not there. When someone's in a study trying to engage at 6 p.m, the family doesn't go, oh no, they're studying. And they say, I need to talk to mum, I need to talk to dad. They don't distinguish boundaries. So we're actually sort of now like 7 o'clock when dinner's done, the little ones are in bed, it's a far better time. So we're going to shift that to 7 to 9 slots. Little things like that, the nuances are really, really important, I think, in this online environment. Time definitely important, so chunking up time a lot more into short, fast, hard periods. Yeah, like the assessment piece, you know, if it's relevant, if it's interesting, if it's applied, it's challenging, that's where the learning is. So, you know, really try and really de-emphasize the delivery. One thing that we have found is that there is definitely two tribes. There are those that will be face-to-face till death do us part. And there's definitely a bunch that go, you know what, I'm actually really enjoying this online stuff, this is awesome. So again, you know, we started our online MBA with some trepidation. Would it cannibalize our market? No, there is clearly two camps in the world. And we're very happy to keep progressing both of our models to growth. I think the final piece is that it did confirm one thing for us, David, around our online model and how that pivoted elsewhere was what we call our co-pilots. So I gotta be honest, I'm in love with Chris's model around his industry engagement. But one of the things we do on our side is we have, I suppose in the American model, probably like a TA, a teaching assistant, but we call them co-pilots. So they are on the side running our Zoom sessions. So they let the facilitator do what they do best. So the co-pilot runs the chat line, does the breakout rooms, make sure we let people in and out of, I guess, if they fall out of a session and we have to let them back in. We implemented our security measures pretty quickly, put them in waiting rooms, etc. So the co-pilot handles all that. So they can handle that side conversation. They can easily flip to polls or, you know, any other online devices the facilitator might be using. And that does allow even people who are not super comfortable with online, just do what they do. And you know, basically the co-pilot manages all the background, which again we found, you know, incredibly helpful in terms of getting people more comfortable delivering online. Tricky part for us is we've costed it in the digital MBA. We've got a model there that can support it. We haven't, our financial model for the regular MBA doesn't have that additional cost in it, so we've got to figure out a way to make that happen. But this is the new normal, right? And we're very happy to, I guess, move forward and try and fund things that work. Now, very happy to get rid of things that don't work. So yeah, look, we've been learning along the way. If you think you've heard it all, I think we all know you're in trouble. So yeah, no, it's been good.
Thanks, Glenn. And we've got some questions coming in. So if it's all right with you guys, I'm going to start with these. I think this is probably one for you, Heather, if that's okay. So brace yourself. How important has student input and consultation been in your success? Did you find that students have innovative or interesting ideas on ways to engage and learn in a digital manner that perhaps faculty or staff hadn't considered?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've probably got two examples. I've got an example from our, what I call our MBA, adults, average age probably 35 plus. And then I've got an example and they're part-time, and then I've got an example for our MBMs, full-time on campus, probably average age in your mid-20s. The one thing that we hadn't thought about was New Zealand went into 4 levels of lockdown. Level 4 was we were completely locked down. Level 3, we had a little bit more freedom, but we had to stick into smaller of groups of people. And then obviously level 2, level 1, and at the moment we're in level 1, basically free for all. But during this time, the university had to make some really strict decisions. And those decisions were made recognizing the majority of their programs. Didn't recognize and take into account that when we could actually meet outside of our lockdown bubble, which was our household, that actually students wanted to meet. And I said, well, I'm sorry, you can't meet on campus. We can't meet on campus. The university is still closed for students. Their innovation was, well, you know what? Zoom works. We've all got our computers. We'll go down to the local cafe or we'll meet at somebody's house and we'll actually have our collective conversation with a group of people together, but we'll also do it via technology with those that can't be with us. So we actually had, with that MBA group of students, we had a convener in one part of New Zealand. We had students in the Waikato, some at home, some meeting in people's houses. We had those in Tauranga, which is about 100 kilometres away, in a very similar situation. And you got these pockets of groups where you actually didn't need to create a breakout room, because you actually had the automatic breakout rooms actually happening. And that actually created the importance for the convener of that paper to create that space that wasn't necessarily the forced space that comes from breakout rooms. And that was really quite interesting. And that's something we're going to continue with. That ability for students who don't want to come, like Glen was talking about. Some may say, I want to turn out 4 out of 6 of them. But actually technology allows us still to engage with them if they're not there. And that's something that we possibly hadn't thought about before. So you'd even have a student saying, hey, look, Professor Joe, John, who's currently online, he's actually got something to say. So the students are leading the conversation with their own teammates in their class. From an MBM perspective, we're talking full-time at university, traditionally international, predominantly international students, predominantly from China or India. So the traditional, used to the traditional sage on the stage environment for learning, that was challenging. And so from them, from an innovation perspective, theirs was actually, we tried to break some of these classes of about 70 into smaller classes and actually run them 3 times. What we found was, and we recorded them, was they actually wanted to be involved in every single session. So actually after the first couple of times of taking the same class, running it for 1 hour, running it for another hour, running it for another hour, and breaking the class down to make smaller groups, the feedback from the students was, actually, we don't want that. We want to all be together. So run a longer session with us all together. So it almost went against what we were thinking, but it came down to the way that they wanted to learn. And I think that was really critical from a teaching perspective. There's 2 different, everyone's got a different way to learn. And it's actually engaging that group of students in the way that they actually want to learn. So that was a real takeaway for us.
Thanks, Heather. Next question is a little bit more challenging, so I'm not going to pick one of you. I'm going to let you decide amongst yourselves. You mentioned Zoom fatigue. Other providers are available, but you talked about Zoom fatigue, and somebody's asking if students want to network with each other sort of separately from their synchronous learning, how they would sort of do that without experiencing hours of talking virtually. Do you have any suggestions or ideas?
I'll take a first go on this one because it was really interesting. Going back to our MBM students, the guys that wanted this time online, the one thing that they brought to us about 2 weeks into lockdown was the university's done really well with creating us these Zoom environments, and the lecturers are doing a really good job. But what happens to us when we want to talk outside of class? Where's the technology for us? Where's the support mechanisms for us? What do we use? Now, it's actually, we hadn't thought about that. We hadn't thought about the student side of things. We just thought about the delivery side of things. And in many senses, thinking about my son who's 12 years old, his school environment, they use Google Chat. They use all these different technologies which are available. But we hadn't thought of actually talking about fatigue, saying what are all the different ways that you guys can actually go away and girls can go away and do it yourself, and actually reduce the fatigue of Zoom by using other methods. And as soon as we gave them those sorts of options, you'd actually find that students weren't necessarily Zooming in. They were Google hanging out. They were doing a Google Meet with you. They were using Teams, all the different ones that worked, so it wasn't always the same environment. I think that was a real critical piece of learning, and I would say that a lot of secondary schools in New Zealand probably learnt that a lot quicker than we did at a tertiary level. I'll pass on to Chris and Glen.
Yeah, no, I think Heather, you're quite right. I think from a university perspective, business school perspective, we often just worry about our side of things in terms of, okay, how do we deliver the content, how we deliver the material? We never think of it from a holistic, what is that student experience going to look like? Now, in a pre-COVID era, I'm familiar with models where you run the program online, but I mean, students being students, and if they're, the mature age student and they want to have the conversations, they'll find their own ways of doing things. But as a university and a business school, I think we often fall short in terms of, not going that extra step to create that platform that is not Zoom or not Moodle or not Blackboard, to think about, how do students carry on the conversation without, a class being in session. I must say, I mean, we haven't done that quite well. I know I've got students who have met outside sessions and gone for pizzas and things like that outside of the Zoom environment. But yeah, as a university, as a business school, that's probably a failing on our part that we haven't gone that far. Glen?
Yeah, years ago, I wrote a paper, or sort of got some data off MBAs on the use of Yammer, and I've always seen that these tools are great ways of keeping a conversation going outside of class. Our observation is that WhatsApp is definitely the weapon of choice for our executive MBAs. They're a formalized cohort. They set up their own channels pretty quickly, so that our existing MBAs, executive MBAs, they already had their WhatsApp sort of channels going, and that's always a big thing for them. We did set up pretty early on a Teams channel for our MBAs. So normally they don't have a Teams channel, even though we've got mandatory Teams channels for our digital cohorts. So again, that'll be interesting to see whether that continues, whether they would like to see that happen. It's largely zero cost to us, but yeah, definitely Teams has had its cage rattled a little bit, I think, by Zoom. So they've already upped their game a little bit in some functionality areas. What will be fascinating to see if Zoom actually branches out to have functionality like Slack or WhatsApp. That could be really interesting to see play out. You just get to forgive myself and Heather and Chris being strategy people. We love talking about what's happening in the market. And that's be fascinating to see that play out as what is the optimal combination of tools and functionalities for a collaboration platform. So, but definitely for us, don't hear Slack much used anymore. Teams, WhatsApp, they're the ones that predominantly are great ways to keep the conversation going long after the class, basically. So yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, guys. Just a couple of practical questions that a couple of people have asked, so I'm just gonna mash them up a little bit. In terms of workload for academics, has your school had to make changes to the model of workload in light of moving online? And secondly, somebody's asking around, are there any intellectual property issues in terms of recorded material, and how are you addressing those at your schools?
That is a really good question, and I think workload is a challenging one, and a lot of staff have gone. I suppose when you're delivering something where you've done a synchronous Zoom session with a group, and then actually you've got a group of students that are offshore, because we had a group of our MBMs that were still stuck in China, and had started the program, yet their timetable didn't work for it to actually work synchronously. So we had to do another synchronous session, and you're sitting there going, you can see the workload model increasing and increasing and increasing. We sat there and we thought critically about the importance of explaining and supporting staff for developing that material up front. We didn't have any more resources to help develop the material, but we were conscious of working with our two heads of school. So to say, well, if someone's investing time now to develop that sort of resource, and this links onto your issue about copyright of resource, but if they're developing that resource now, we need to make sure that we're actually going to reward them later on to still be able to deliver on this program. So we're not going to say, do all the work now, and guess what, by the way, when it comes to next year, you're not teaching on the program. This is your workload for the following year. So by having those conversations with the two heads of schools, which are where all the academic staff report to, they don't report, no one reports to me. I have no direct influence over anyone. I just have to say in a nice way, it'd be wonderful if you could do this. But I suppose as a smaller faculty and division at the business school, we actually brought everybody on board, and their two immediate, the two immediate heads of school said, we'll support you by supporting these staff by saying that the number one thing that they'll get next year is this at the top of their workload model. So if they're investing now, that investment's going to pay off, because that material they'll be able to deliver next year, and the upfront stuff would have already been done. A lot of that material, collecting it, the short, sharp, chunked recordings that they're doing, they'll be able to use again. So in terms of copyright, anything, obviously, we've said this belongs to, it's a collective. We've never used the terminology, it's yours or it's theirs. It's a collective that we're actually using to deliver a program. So by me, I did a short video for a course for somebody else at undergraduate level. I was never going to say you can never use it again. It was about that collective working as a team, creating that team environment with faculty, so that somebody who was an expert in one area might deliver a 15-minute short, sharp video, but actually, who does it belong to? It belongs to us all, because we're all delivering on the program. So it was quite, again, that was that behavioural change, starting to unpack those conversations around, actually, if we're putting the stuff together, where is the copyright? Who does it belong to? But actually, why are we even here in the first place? We're here to deliver great learning and actually allowing business people out in the business world to actually gain further understanding. So we have to do that in a way that's collective.
I might just add a couple of points to that one. So just building on Heather, I think that sense of purpose is quite important. And when we got onto this mission of redesigning the MBA, from the outset, we said the MBA has to deliver on something. And for us, that something was, an impact into the city, not just economic, but social as well. So as far as the workload issue is concerned, the way we tackled it, in fact, we probably stole some of Glen's ideas. One was the co-pilot approach. So we recognize that what the academics do well is the research and the content and all of that. So we didn't want to load them up with all the other issues around, figure out how the technology works, figure out how you deliver a live session in class while keeping track of what's happening on Zoom. So we stole one of Glen's ideas around the co-pilot, and so now we've got a digital learning coordinator who's part of every session that we run. So that was part of the support we provided. And obviously, again, I think this is one of Glen's idea that we stole, was trying to get alumni back into the program. So, the alumni, a lot of them keep saying, can we come back and do some of the courses and things like that. So the way to get them back, which is absolutely low cost, if anything, is to get them back, give them some sort of responsibility. They're more than happy to talk about their war stories, being in the MBA program, want to see who the new breed of MBA is coming through, and at the same time be part of the new program as well. So we use different approaches, because the last thing we want to do is load academics with all the administrative and the technology and all of those sorts of issues. I mean, to the extent that I must say, as Glen mentioned earlier, I mean, there are some who wouldn't move away from the face-to-face approach and just say, the face-to-face approach is the way to go, and that's all they want to focus on as academics. One of the biggest critics I would have had in refreshing our program and going blended, that sole critic has now become the front runner for everything online. We said, we were planning on doing a few more things online, and I went out to the team and I said, how many of y'all would want to be part of this? He was the first one who responded. So it's that behavioral change and mindset change again that comes in.
Yeah, I'll only add to that by saying when I publicly recognise, it's not just the academic staff that have stepped up at this period, like our administrative staff and our learning design staff, just a whole new level. That they actually probably took more of the brunt on our team than the academics, to be honest. Again, it was a case of what can we do to support them. So the learning designers were having weekly meetings, daily meetings with as leading up, going, how are you setting your breakout rooms? What polls do you need? How are you setting up your breaks? What content, do you need actually any videos done? And anyone who's done any kind of video editing will know that's a tough, laborious job to just produce those videos. So those guys really, and the administrative team in terms of redoing calendars, a lot of comms around and a lot of angst sort of laden, I guess, kind of queries that they were able to just tamp down and really keep a control of people's, I guess, where they were at, and we're communicating really strongly. So I think this is genuinely been a team effort. I think I wouldn't want to conflate this episode though with online in general. This obviously for all of us was a pretty unique environment and a pretty unique take. Hopefully all of us would agree that the online delivery in a normal environment is not this chaotic and not this costly, inverted commas, in terms of time and energy and effort. But certainly over this period, just everyone has stepped up, and all doing it from home, remotely, and all that stuff. It's been pretty cool to see. I think people are tired, there's no doubt. People are, starting to really kind of feel it. So you've got to be, again, conscious of that and make sure people are, adequately managing their health and workloads. But no real formal acknowledgement of workload right now. But there really is, I think it would be unreasonable at this point to say that, this is simply that's unusual, that we just, as always, as professionals, step in there and get the job done. But I think as we all know, we've also got to look after particularly young ones who first time they've seen this sort of stuff. I don't know about anyone else on the panel or out there in the audience, inverted commas, just seeing how people react differently to this has been quite a learning as well. And that'll probably stay with us in terms of how we progress that forward, in terms of how people think about their futures, think about their lives, think about the relevance of education and that. And again, I'm sort of thinking, well, what curriculum changes should we make to try and adjust to that? I mean, Canterbury, Christchurch in particular, Christchurch just keeps taking hit after hit after hit. So, you know, it's really, really nice to see, I guess, your MBAs have a whole new view on, actually, we can get through this, we can bloody do anything and rebuild, you know, from there. So yeah, look, I'm rambling now, but it has been a fascinating time, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, just wanted to formally acknowledge the team, and I'm sure you guys are the same, and tell you what they've done. Amazing.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. I think we've got time for one more question. It's not going to be a quick question, but I'm going to try my best. I think this picks up on a lot of your points, Glenn. Somebody's asked, 3 out of 4 deans believe their schools will now turn towards more distance learning. Do you think COVID-19 has been a wake-up call for business schools to move with the times and look forward to the future of work and learning? Could this mean an end to the face-to-face MBA?
Can I start this off? Can I be the grumpy man in the room?
How much time do we have?
Yeah, look. My take on this is that I think that's a little hyperbolic. I can guarantee that all of us know of at least 10 people who go, if I never see another Zoom session again, I'll be a very happy person. You know, there's that. I think, as I say, I've got a bunch of people, as soon as we have stage 3 restrictions announced, and that's a downgrade for us, that they are instantly back in the building. They can't wait to be back. So my argument to my fellow panelists and the rest of you out there is that, yeah, I think the jury's still out on that one. I still think there's a place for good quality, engaging face-to-face experiences. Yeah, be my take.
To me, it comes down to what does the participant want? And we surveyed across the university, undergraduate and master's level. And it was really interesting. And the survey was, what do you want from basically moving forward for our second trimester, which is our B trimester coming in July. And it was interesting. There was an even split between face-to-face and online. And really what it came down to it was online gave the flexibility that if something came up, I wouldn't miss out on my learning. It wasn't online as the only way I want to learn. It was actually, it gave me the flexibility. But what we're really seeing from those that are more at that master's level, so those that are at the latter parts of their undergraduate degree or a master's level, was actually that face-to-face and socialization is so critical for elements of the learning that is required for that critical thinking and thoughts. And actually, that doesn't mean they've got to get together all the time, but you've got to create that space and that place to be able to do that. And the place, the university is a good place to go to for it because it creates that time away from the family, away from the work distractions that go on, to be able to have that really good, robust discussion. So our Vice-Chancellor and our head of school, equivalent to our dean, really sees moving forward that we got to change the way that we preempt the delivery of material to create the place at the university to have that discussion, to have that socialization. But actually, we still also need to allow that flexibility, that hybrid approach, so that if someone is stuck because of family reasons or because of work reasons or because they're out in the country and there's a huge downpour and it's actually easier to study from home that day, we create all those environments for them. If we do that well, we're always going to have people wanting to come to university to further their education and their knowledge.
I'll just make a couple of quick points, and I don't think I can say it any better than what Glenn and Heather have said. I think to Glenn's point, the experience has to be engaging, and nobody wants to come to university for the sake of wanting to be at university. So it's, you know, they want the place, they want to be engaged, they want to be engaged in the learning process, And it's also about flexibility at points in time, especially for the MBA lot. I mean, most, at least in the ANZ context, it's mostly the mature age ones that come back to university, and so they want that level of flexibility. As far as whether the form of business schools and programs change into the future, I think that's inevitable. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's the hybrid model. You've got the technology, you've got the platform to deliver the content and the material that you might want to deliver, but then you use the university and the place for the engagement and the activities and the problems. So I think the traditional view and the traditional form of university and business schools will change and morph, but I don't think it's one or the other. It's got to be both.
Great, thank you very much all. Unfortunately, I think that's all we've got time for today. Paul and I don't actually want this to end, so thank you so much for giving up your time to speak to us today and sharing such great insight and also some practical advice. So I'll let you get to bed now, because I appreciate it's quite late where you are. Glen?
Can I just say one thing? So the three of us plus about roughly 20 others in the AMBA network over the last 12 months have been trying to set up what we call a digital delivery special interest group. It's the first special interest group that AMBA has actually set up. So our big grand plan was at this year's Global Forum to have a session and get everyone on board. But if you're keen to be part of that group, we would love to have you. We have a WhatsApp channel. See, there we go, WhatsApp. And we, post this, we plan to do a whole bunch of, I guess, sort of activities, engagements, webinars, etc. Just to basically have a group that basically talks about these issues in more depth, in more detail, collectively build our knowledge and skill about delivering awesome MBA programs digitally. So search me out if you want to be part of that WhatsApp group. Just send me an email and I'll send you the details, and that would be awesome if you want to be part of that group. Cheers.
Thanks, Glen. Okay, as I said, this is the end of the session, so thank you again, all three of you, for taking part, for your insight and really your sort of candor. It was really appreciated, and I think it's really useful at a time like this that although we're physically distant, to be socially inclusive, and I think that really came across this morning stroke this evening, so thank you again. Just a quick announcement. If you've already signed up for the sessions for the rest of the conference, you will be about to receive an email from us with the link to join. So if not, Paul's included the links in the chat box for you all, so just copy and paste these into your browser and you'll be able to register. So just to remind you, we've got 2 more sessions today. The first one is at 2 p.m. BST, so that's with Hanna-Leena Pessanen, who is Dean at Jyväskylä School of Business and Economics in Finland, and she's going to talk about addressing climate change, the role of business schools. That will be followed by Claudine Blamey, Head of Sustainability and Digital Strategy at Argent and former Director of Sustainability at EasyJet, who will outline her thoughts on sustainable development and why it's important for MBAs. And the final session today will be at 3:30 p.m. BST, and that will be with the team from Business Because, who will talk about how to create a winning content marketing strategy. So as I mentioned, all those details are in your chat box. We've got plenty more sessions to come within the conference, and you can find out details about them on the AMBA website. So all that remains to be said from myself is thank you once again to the panel, and I'll look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Thanks again, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Appreciate it. Cheers. See you guys.
Good night.
See ya.